This is Michael Smoot for YouTube Commentaries. Today is January 7th. It's a Saturday. We're in the year 2017. Happy New Year, everyone. The topic of today's conversation is there is much to celebrate in the year 2017. Today we're going to talk about what the celebration's about. This spring it will be my son's 23rd birthday. In the early summer, it will be 28 years in municipal government. I've been employed there. In the spring, it will be 29 years we've been living in this community, and we've owned our co-op apartment. And this spring, it will also be our 30th anniversary of marriage. And there's the goal of this conversation is to be informative, entertaining, and convey meaning to my audience. And with that said, let's go to the introduction. Or let's move forward together with the main body of this conversation. As far as my son's 23rd birthday, that'll be in about 3 months. And at this time, I'd like to talk about before he was born and at the time of his birth. We reached a point in he was born in 1994. We reached a point in early 1994. After seeing doctors, it was determined that our best option of having a child was adoption. Now, this is 1994. Very few people are carrying around cell phones. There were no such thing as smartphones. And the internet might have been between 5 or 6 years old, but very people were on the internet. So in order to find a birth mother who might be willing to allow us to be adoptive parents, we placed ad in penny savers, and in particular we were successful after about a month placing ads in Texas newspapers. We set up a special 1-800 line, and we did receive a phone call from the birth mother. And from then our lawyer was involved, and he set up the birth parents. They had one child, and they drove to San Antonio, Texas, where they were represented by an adoption agency. Much of the costs were covered by my wife and myself to pay for the care of the birth mother until a child was born. That child we were hoping to adopt. So what happened was, about 3 days before the birth mother gave birth to a baby that would be our son, she had a lot of things on her mind. And she was on the phone with my wife all evening into the early morning, and my wife had very little sleep. So after 2 or 3 nights, she was completely exhausted. And our son was born, and what I remember out of all that was we bought plane tickets, and we took a flight to San Antonio out of LaGuardia. And what happened to us that day hadn't happened in the past and hasn't happened since. What happened was we missed our flight. We were at the airport, and the airline said, well, the next flight is in 6 hours. And at that point, my wife said to me, do you want to go home? We could go back to sleep and come back. And I said, we're not leaving the airport. And we didn't leave the airport. And so, you know, we ate, we read, we hung out, and eventually we flew to San Antonio, Texas. There was a stopover somewhere. And what I remember was, by the time we got into San Antonio, rented a car, got a hotel room, we got to bed at 3 or 4 in the morning. We were completely exhausted. And the next day we went to the hospital. We met the birth mother. We saw our new son, and we were delighted. And and then we met with the people from the adoption agency. And what I remember that day and the following day is something that only happened to me twice in my lifetime, and this is one of the two times. What happened was I had an adrenaline rush. That entire first day full day we were in San Antonio, Texas, and the next day. It was a mind-body thing. I was 38 years at the time. 6 weeks prior to my 39th birthday. We had been married for 7 years. So this is something we had worked up to for a long time as a couple. So this was a seminal event in our lives. So it was very exciting, and we spent time with the birth parents, and they have a child they were raising. We bought them gifts. We bought gifts for our son. We took them out to dinner. And eventually, we received word from our lawyer, the adoption agency, and through legal authorities in Texas that we were free to fly home. So, and fly home we did, and it was uneventful, and we made our plane flight that day. So now it's nearly 23 years later, and my son, 3 years ago, it'll be 3 years ago, about the time of his 23rd birthday, 3 months from now, he'll be 23. When he was 20, he decided he wanted to do things his way, and with his girlfriend, who was prior to her 19th birthday, they traveled out to Southwest, and they both have jobs. They're both doing well at their jobs. They're both continuing with school. And they're busy. They have other responsibilities in their home. They have 2 cats, a dog, and a ferret. That's right, a ferret. So in 3 months, it'll be 3 years. They've been out there together, living together in the Southwest, and my son will be 23. So I'll just make this one quick comment about my son. I'm going to use my right index finger to make a diagram. This is a box, and in that box, everything inside that box, these are the things that I learned about being a parent, having grown up in my parents' home. And what I've discovered and my wife has discovered is sometimes in raising a child, the things that he does are outside of the box. So sometimes we're on the back of our heels, but we have sort of a huddle. We exchange ideas, and when one of us is calm, the other one is losing it, so we both help each other out as parents, and if there is any secret, that's the secret. That's what we've done the past 22, 23 years as parents. But now that I've covered my son's birth and what's going on now and what we're going to be celebrating with him this year, let me go on to the number 28. 28 years in the municipal government. The thing about it is, and why it's important, was I was a government major in college, 4 years political science, 1.5 to 2 years public administration, and when I finished school, I worked for 8 or 9 years in the nonprofit and proprietary sector, and I worked in healthcare because I thought there was a chance I could combine government and healthcare. And so working 8 or 9 years outside of government, when I was finally able to get a job in government, it was a professional level position. It was on a provisional basis. Later on, I would have to take civil service exams. And what I could remember is the first 2 days of that job, it was the same thing as the trip to San Antonio. I had this adrenaline rush. Only 2 times in my life have I had it, but my body was racing. It was sort of a mind-body situation going on, and so these are only 2 times in my entire life have I experienced this feeling. It's not a feeling you could manufacture. It just is. You just have it, and when you're going through it, it's memorable and it's something to be appreciated. So I wanted to share that with you in the video about that adrenaline rush and how it's only happened twice in my life. In previous videos about how I got my confidence back, and you never know, I've covered a lot of ground related to work. But I will say that in the last year, I've written 6 essays for my blog. We're all in this together on Google+, and this is my 11th YouTube talk. So I would say that the fact that a number of responsibilities that I loved about working were taken away from me. And in the last year, I come home every day from work, and I work on an internet project. On the weekends in my free time, I do as well, but I work at a nice pace so I don't burn out from these new avocations. But what I've discovered belatedly and thankfully, that even when things were taken away from me, it was a negative. Fortunately, I've been able to find a way to take a negative and make it into a positive. And all of the videos are near and dear to me, but let me just briefly say the first 2. One was about civil liberties, the other one about human rights. The protagonists in these stories, the lead people, were heroes to me, and it resonates inside me what they were able to achieve. And it's nice from time to time to go back and watch the videos and listen to what I said in them. And I really enjoy them. And another third video that I enjoy, Can You Go Home Again? And I enjoy it because it talks about from the first 26 years of my life living in Nassau County. And I would say that because I did the heavy lifting, I was in therapy, I talked about these situations in my life with my therapist and my wife and some friends, and I got on with my life, and I'm able to look back with much fonder appreciation than when I was going through it. Okay, well, we've covered the number 28 and 28 years in municipal government. Let's go to 29. We've been living in Forest Hills, which is an outer borough of Queens, of New York City. It's an outer borough of New York City, Queens County. And we've been living there for 29 years. We live in a co-op apartment, which means in another year we'll own the apartment. Now, the thing about the neighborhood, it really ties in, it parallels my ancestors. In the 1890s, my great-grandparents came from Romania and Hungary, and my grandparents were either born over there or here. They lived in Brooklyn, where my father grew up, and his brothers, my uncles, and they spoke Yiddish, and they eat Eastern European Jewish food like chicken fricassee and chicken noodle soup. And so I could understand. I could understand looking at my background and then looking at what's going on in my community. We moved in here in 1988, and from 1988 throughout the 90s, quite a number of Jews from the Soviet Union moved into our town. Those from Russia speak Russian. Those from the outer republics, the stands, Kazakhstan, and the other stands also speak a second language called Bukhari. The food they eat is a little different than the kind of food my grandmother would cook for us when I'd come over my paternal grandmother's home. But I see a parallel to what was happening in the 1890s to my ancestors and how they became American citizens, and my parents went on, and my aunts and uncles went on to middle-class lives in America. And I see what's going on in Forest Hills. It's 100 years later and more. I understand and appreciate what they're going through. And it's interesting how it's interesting how history repeats itself. There's a large influx of Jews. Instead of Eastern Europe, they're coming from Russia and the outer republics. It's interesting to watch that in Forest Hills. It's also happening in surrounding hamlets, Kew Gardens, Rego Park, and also in different parts of Russia. So I see the parallel in our lives as just a difference of 100 years, but it's something I understand, appreciate, and embrace. So now that we've gone through the number 29, let's go through the number 30. And let me, 30, it'll be 30 years married in May. And I want to talk briefly about my wife, and I want to lead off with a misquote. F. Scott Fitzgerald has been misquoted as saying there are no second acts in American life. And from what I've Googled is he stated something that he had reconsidered that earlier quote. He wrote it in an essay. And the reason why I state this, leading off with F. Scott Fitzgerald's misquote, stems from the fact that in the last 13 years, my wife has transitioned to a new field. She teaches public school, and she sees that she's making a difference with her students, and she's well liked by the parents of the students, by school administrators, teachers, the paraprofessionals, and she really enjoys work. The only thing she battles is fatigue. For 8 or 9 of those 13 years, she's taught college as an adjunct professor. She's taught graduate students who are teachers to become teachers, better teachers. And she's also taught at the undergraduate level. She's also tutored students. But what I'm glad to see and happy to see is that she has cut back on the additional teaching. The adjunct teaching was at night, where the public schools is during the day. But what she does at night now is she practices piano all the time. She has 2 music teachers. She performs at 3 or 4 recitals a year, and she seems to be enjoying it. I don't think performing before a live audience is something she initially embraced, but she's gotten past whatever nervousness, and she seems to embrace and enjoy the process. And in addition, my wife is a trainer at the local gym, and she enjoys staying in shape. And we belong to a pool club in a town in eastern Queens. And she swims. She's a strong swimmer. She's a stronger swimmer than me. And she also enjoys water exercise called Water Zumba, to music and instructor. It's a group activity. She seems to enjoy that a lot. Now, to categorize her overall feeling from her new career, the last 13 plus years, and her avocations, I was thinking about the word happiness. And I was also thinking about something John Kennedy said a couple of times in his 2 years and 10 months as president. He quoted from Aristotle. He said the Greeks defined happiness as full use of your powers, a long line of excellence. And I think that because my wife is using her skills, her vocation and her avocations, and in keeping with the Greeks, she's making great use of her powers, a long line of excellence, and so I think that gives her a measure of happiness. And if she's happy, I'm happy. In terms of 30 years marriage, we're hoping our son and his girlfriend can fly in from the Southwest and celebrate with us, and perhaps we'll celebrate with other families as well. Well, now I've covered it, 23, 28, 29, and 30. These are milestones, anniversaries that we'll be commemorating and celebrating in 2017. Let me briefly summarize. The connection between the 2 first stories, the the first time I had that adrenaline rush is when I started in municipal government. The second time is when we adopted our son. And these are seminal events in my life, events that I'm very proud of, and the importance of the situation affected my mind and my body. And these are only 2 times in my life have I had that feeling. Now, 29, the fact that I'm able to draw a parallel between my great-grandparents who came from Romania and Hungary in the 1890s and the Soviet Jews who live in my community who've come over in the 1980s and 90s. These are our neighbors. We socialize with some people who are they speak Russian and from the Soviet Union. So living in Forest Hills, I feel a connection with our neighbors and with my great-grandparents who came from Eastern Europe. And as far as our 30th anniversary, it's a joyful occasion. My wife and I and our son, we love each other very much. We're very happy with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's mom, and we hope to celebrate them with them soon. Now, before I say goodbye, let me say that this is Michael Smook for YouTube Commentaries. It's January 7th. We're in the year 2017. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.